German general opens the report and reads the final line. Impossible to mobilize armored forces to Normandy. The panzers were ready, the commanders were waiting for orders, but the rails no longer existed. Allied bombing had destroyed bridges, stations, and locomotives across France. The High Command realized at that moment German armor would never reach the front. Too late. But how did the Allies know exactly where to strike? And what was said in that room when the truth became clear? Today we reveal the declassified documents that show the secret plan behind the total paralysis of German logistics, and the intercepted conversations no one was supposed to hear. Welcome to our channel, Deep History. Leave in the comments where you're watching from. We want to know. In early June 1944, the German High Command faced a logistical crisis unlike any other in the war. The invasion at Normandy had begun on the 6th, and the defensive response required immediate reinforcement. Panzer divisions stationed across France and Belgium were ordered to move toward the coast. The 2nd Panzer Division, the 1st Panzer Division, and the 12th Panzer Division were among the units designated for rapid deployment. But within 72 hours, it became evident that most of these formations would never arrive in time. The reason was not combat, it was infrastructure. 4 months prior to the invasion, Allied air forces had executed Operation Transportation, a systematic campaign to destroy the French railway network. The plan was conceived by British and American strategic planners who understood that German armored divisions depended entirely on rail transport for rapid movement. Tanks could not travel long distances under their own power without mechanical failure or fuel depletion. Railways were the arteries of German mobile warfare, and the Allies intended to sever them. Between April and early June, Allied bombers struck marshalling yards, repair depots, locomotive factories, and key rail junctions throughout northern France. The attacks were precise and relentless. Bridges over the Seine and Loire rivers were destroyed. Tunnels were collapsed. Switching stations were reduced to rubble. By the time of the Normandy landings, the French rail system was barely functional. German commanders on the ground sent reports describing the damage, but the full scope was not immediately understood at headquarters. What came next would change everything. On June 7th, senior officers at the German command responsible for the Western Front convened to assess movement schedules. Maps were laid out showing planned routes for armored reinforcements. But reconnaissance reports told a different story. Entire sections of track were impassable. Repair crews were under constant air attack. Locomotives that survived the bombing were being targeted during daylight hours. The divisions that were supposed to reach Normandy within 2 days were still hundreds of kilometers away, crawling forward on secondary roads under threat of aerial interdiction. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the commander overseeing Western defenses, reviewed the intelligence summaries and understood the magnitude of the problem. The mobility advantage that had defined German armored doctrine since the early campaigns was gone. In Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, panzer divisions had moved swiftly by rail to exploit breakthroughs and encircle enemy formations. Now, in their own occupied territory, they could barely move at all. The infrastructure they had relied upon for 4 years had been methodically dismantled by an enemy that had learned how to win without meeting them on the battlefield. Documents declassified decades later revealed the internal assessments made during those critical days. One report from the Wehrmacht Transportation Office stated that rail capacity in northern France had been reduced by more than 70%. Another memo described the impossibility of moving heavy equipment without exposure to fighter bomber attacks. Third document, marked urgent, requested immediate authorization to reroute divisions through alternate corridors. The reply was blunt: no alternate corridors existed. But that wasn't the most critical part yet. Allied intelligence had intercepted German communications throughout the spring. Signals intelligence units had decrypted Wehrmacht traffic related to troop movements and logistical planning. The Allies knew which divisions were stationed where. They knew the rail lines the Germans intended to use, and they knew that, if those lines were destroyed, the entire defensive response would collapse. The bombing campaign was not random, it was surgical. The German High Command did not fully grasp this until after the invasion had already begun. In the days following June 6th, as reports continued to arrive detailing delays, destroyed convoys, and stalled columns, the realization set in. The Allies had not simply attacked the railways. They had studied German doctrine, identified the dependencies, and removed the capability to respond. It was a form of warfare that relied not on firepower alone, but on understanding the enemy's operational limitations and exploiting them before the first shot was fired. No one in that room expected the next message. On June 9th, a communication from one Panzer division reported that the unit, originally expected to reach Normandy within 48 hours, was still moving through central France. The division had been forced onto rural roads where it faced continuous harassment from Allied aircraft and French resistance forces. Fuel shortages compounded the delays. By the time elements of the division arrived near the front, nearly 2 weeks had passed. Other units experienced similar paralysis. Panzer divisions stationed near Belgium could not move their vehicles by rail and resorted to road marches that consumed days instead of hours. Another division faced the same constraints. The conversations that took place within German headquarters during this period were documented in war diaries and post-war interrogations. Officers expressed frustration, confusion, and a dawning awareness that the situation was irreversible. One senior staff officer reportedly stated that the paralysis of the rail network had done more damage than an entire enemy army group. Another noted that without mobility, armored divisions were simply collections of static weapons with no operational purpose. The doctrine that had carried Germany through the early years of the war had been rendered obsolete by an enemy that refused to meet them on their terms. The following report would destabilize the entire operation. By mid-June, it was clear that the German response to Normandy had failed before it truly began. The Panzer divisions that did eventually reach the front arrived piecemeal, exhausted, and without the logistical support needed to sustain offensive operations. The strategic reserve that was supposed to counter the invasion materialized as a coherent force. The Allies, meanwhile, continued to expand their beachhead, bringing in reinforcements and supplies faster than the Germans could react. The impact of Operation Transportation extended beyond the immediate tactical situation. It demonstrated that modern warfare had evolved beyond the movement of armies on maps. Logistics, infrastructure, and intelligence had become weapons in their own right. The side that controlled information and supply lines could dictate the terms of engagement without firing a shot. The German High Command had built a war machine designed for rapid maneuver, but they had not accounted for an enemy capable of dismantling the system that made maneuver possible. In the months that followed, Germany's position in France continued to deteriorate. The inability to concentrate forces at Normandy was one of several failures that led to the collapse of the Western Front by late summer. Paris was liberated in August. By September, Allied forces had reached the German border. The failure to reinforce Normandy was not the only reason for this outcome, but it was a critical factor that shaped everything that came after. Another silent page of the war finally comes to light. Continue through our archive of forgotten operations. Tell us what you think in the comments. Subscribe, leave your like, and share this video with 2 people you remembered while watching.